Hi, I'm Matt Williams. Welcome to Glimpses. My guest today is a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright, screenwriter, director, and actor. He is the former co-artistic director of the New York City Labyrinth Theater Company. He has won countless awards and has been produced on Broadway, off Broadway, and in theaters across America. I am truly in awe of this man's talent, and I'm so happy to have him on this podcast. Stephen Adly Guirgis, welcome to Glimpses.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
And that's not exaggeration. That's not hyperbole. I truly am awe of your talent. So
Well,
I want to talk about the Pulitzer Prize and the play that you wrote, Between Riverside and Crazy, right?
yeah,
Talk a little bit about the journey of that, because it premiered off Broadway and it took a long time to get to Broadway. What happened there?
yeah. Well, first of all, it started because Stephen McKinley Henderson, who plays the lead in the play, I went up to Buffalo, and he lives in Buffalo, and we're good friends. I hadn't seen him in a while, and he had like a cane, and I was like, okay, that's something new, but people have canes. And then as the evening wore on, he started to say, I think I'm done with stage acting. I think I might retire from acting. And I had a couple of beers, and I was like, oh, you can. I'm writing two plays for you, man. One where you're the lead and one where you're the supporting, but it's a really good role. So come on. So by the end of the night, the end of the weekend, I was like, all right, you get your stuff, physical stuff together, and we'll get pages and we'll get rolling. But I didn't have anything. I didn't even have an idea for a play, but I loved the guy so much, and so I was like, all right. So we started, and we did it at the Atlantic Theater, and then we moved it across town, off Broadway, to second stage, and then it took a while to get to Broadway, but we got there,
And it's a brilliant play. And your director did Austin direct every production? Austin Pendleton, the
Austin did.
legendary Austin Pendleton, right?
Amazing.
Yeah. How do you work
Amazing
with a
fellow.
director like that? I mean, he's been around, he's acted, he's directed, he's produced. What was that collaboration like?
It was great. I mean, have you ever worked with Austin?
I know him. I've watched him direct. I've never worked with him as a writer.
He's a wonderful, brilliant, and unique fellow. And actually, the way that it started, because Philip Seymour Hoffman had directed most of my plays, and I had to find another director. And I was at a reading that Austin was in, and I'm watching him, and the play was not so good, but he was great. And I'm watching him. I'm like, he reminds me of something in his work. And I realized something in his work reminded me of Phil. And then I remembered that, Austin was the person who kind of gave Phil his start.
I didn't know that.
His first thing. So somewhere in Phil's evolution, a little bit of Austin must have rubbed off on him, and then he, turned it into his own thing. And I just thought to myself, well, Austin's directed like 5 billion plays.
Right.
I remember walking past a church on the Upper West Side once, and there was a little sandwich board outside, and it was like, Othello tonight, Austin Pendleton, like if he wants to work, he works.
Right.
I said, hey, what do you think? And he said, great. And we had a great, a collaboration. He was.
Are you somebody that rewrites during rehearsals, or do you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So as it evolves, you keep rewriting.
At the time of the first production, I was working on a show in LA, so I kind of had to have a decent, version of the play for them to start with.
Right.
And then I would go back and forth and go to rehearsal. But yeah, a lot of oftentimes I'm writing. You can ask that some of the actors, like during the process,
Right.
But this one was pretty far along when we went into rehearsal.
Okay.
And then the great benefit of being able to do something more than once is if you don't mess it up, it's going to get better.
Yeah.
And and unfortunately, most of the time with theater, it's just sort of like one shot and done. But similar, I had to play Jesus Up the A Train, that David Zayas, and and them had been in, and we had got to do it in a small theater, then in a bigger theater, then at Rikers Island, then in Edinburgh, then in London. By the time it got to the West End, it was tight.
Yeah.
And then this one was as tight as I could get it. When it finally went to Broadway, it was just about checking to make sure that there weren't elements of it that were dated,
Right.
because they talk about Trump and Giuliani and all this stuff, but it was all before all that stuff happened. And I made a couple of changes, and we went with it.
Okay. Well, you named Jesus Hopped the A Train, The Last Days of Judas Iscariot, The Motherfucker with the Hat. I mean, these are all well produced, brilliant plays, and they do play all over the world, correct?
Yeah.
How
Yes.
you must? I don't know too many playwrights that have the career that you have.
I'm extremely fortunate, and also having become a writer at Labyrinth Theater Company. I was an actor, and I'm still an actor, but I've written very little that hasn't been produced, because they would just produce it. They'd be like, well, what are you writing next? Well, what are you writing next? So I'm aware that I've been incredibly fortunate, and I just I don't know. I try to it's not my nature. I'm not one of those guys, like, I can't wait to like sharpen my pencils and
Right.
like, I'm not that guy, but my attitude has been, I guess I was given certain amount of talent that I didn't do anything to earn. And so that as long as I have it, then I have an obligation to write about stuff that means something to me and hopefully will mean something to other people.
Well,
But
your dialogue is brilliant. I mean, it is street poetry. It is just brilliant, and that must come out of also having been an actor. Did you find
definitely,
that being an actor really influenced when you sat down to write?
absolutely. I never studied writing, but I did study acting with William Esper and the Meisner,
Yeah.
and that really, when I started writing plays, it was basically a lot influenced by what I'd learned in class. And then also just like, well, what do I want to see on a stage?
Yes.
If I can't necessarily be in it today, like, what would I like to see? And that's that's where it started.
And when
Yeah.
you write, it's two different processes, obviously. But when you write, and you don't have to get in the weeds on this about your process, but do you have a ritual? Do you have some way you prepare to start writing? Are you a worrier? Do you walk the streets, sit in a bar? Do you just light a candle? What do you do when you get ready to write?
I'm a big procrastinator.
Okay.
And basically, when it gets more painful not to write than to write, then that's when I'll start to do it.
Yeah.
We would go on these retreats in the summer, and John Patrick Shanley would say, I always know when Stephen is about to write, because I'll go into his little cabin and it just keeps getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. Run out of stuff to do. I'll get down to it, because like I said, it's not it's hard, and it's always hard, and you know how it is. I mean,
Yeah.
I respect the hell out of you as well, by the way. And it's like every time I start something new, there's this momentary assumption that it's somehow going to be easier because I've done it before. And really, as the time's going, it seems to get harder. And the only thing that experience gives me is that, like, oh no, I felt like it was impossible before and I got through it. I felt like it was really impossible and I got through it. And it's just, if you sit down and you stay down, something will happen, and then you just gotta repeat that.
But that's the key is sitting down and say, I was talking to a composer, Dan Poyert, and he goes, when you get those blocks or you get that moment where you're kind of, it's a quagmire, you just have to sit down and keep doing it until you break through it, right?
Yeah.
And I think people think writing is, by the fireplace and it's flowing, and it's grinding, hard work. You put your ass in the chair every day and do it, right? And
Yeah,
then
and there's moments where you feel that freedom, and it's seemingly coming out of nowhere, but there's a lot of
yeah,
in between it. But what you were saying about dialogue, it reminded me of a guy. I don't know if you've read him, but you maybe should have him on a podcast. I like to read mysteries. I'm not like I'm trying to re-educate myself, like too old to be re-educating myself, but but mysteries I can digest, and then I filter it in with more substantive stuff. So I was reading this mystery a few years ago, and it was set in South Central LA, young African American detective, and I'm reading it, and I was just like, this is really good. Not only is the African American voice, but every voice is like flawless. And then I look in the back cover, and it's like an Asian fellow. And it's this writer named Joe Edith.
Uh-huh.
And and when I started to get into learning a little bit about him, I felt a certain kinship. Like, he grew up in South Central. He was a Japanese kid, and he got picked on, and had to learn to adapt to a tougher environment. And and then once I realized that, I was like, oh, that's why he writes such great dialogue, because he learned how to listen early, because it was literally a survival strategy. And
Wow.
for me, I grew up in the city, in New York City, in the 70s. I went to, from kindergarten through 8th grade up in Harlem, and it was challenging. And I didn't fit in, and I wasn't a cool kid. I wasn't like a tough kid. I wasn't good at sports. So I really had to listen and absorb and try to, like, talk like my friends talked, and dress like my friends dressed. So I think it made me become an observer and a listener. And I was like, I bet you that's what happened with this Joe Ide fellow as well.
Now,
Uh,
if I've got this correctly, your father was Egyptian, your mother is Irish?
Irish American,
Yeah,
yeah.
Irish American. So you're in Harlem, Egyptian, Irish in Harlem. How did you identify, and how did others identify you?
I mean, first of all, I lived on the Upper West Side. I went to school up in Harlem because my mother wanted me to go to Catholic school,
Okay.
and it was affordable. But first of all, at that time, there was still Irish people, a lot of, in West Harlem, and poor Irish. It tended to be the kids who dressed the worst, or whose underwears were dirty.
Uh,
Tended to be Irish kids
right.
more than anyone. But I guess I was like a white kid. That's how I was seen. Um, uh, but it was a weird thing, because up in Harlem, I didn't quite fit in, but on the Upper West Side, I didn't quite fit in either. Socioeconomically,
Right.
like the kids that lived on the Upper West Side, they all had more money than me. They went to sleepaway camp. I remember I taught myself to juggle, because all my friends were taking like a clowning course after school, but we couldn't afford it. So socioeconomically, I fit in better with my friends uptown, but not quite in other ways. So I'm an assimilator. When I saw
Yeah.
the movie Zelig,
Yes.
I was like, yeah, definitely got some Zelig in me,
Well,
no
it's
doubt.
and
And
that's
now as an adult, like it's, to me, it's like the litmus test of identifying is like, if the cab stops for you, you're white. It doesn't matter. My dad was brown. He was Egyptian. Yeah. But the cab stops for me. I remember, and a friend of ours, a friend of your wives, Ron Cephas Jones, who just
yes.
passed.
God bless him. Yes.
Great actor, and he was doing Richard III at the Public, and he lived with me for many, many years. And the night I went, I was so happy, and he was so great. And afterwards, there was a throng of people around him, and in front of the theater, and he's talking, kind of holding court, this and that. And I'm waiting for him. And at a certain point, he calls me over, and he's like, "Can you do me a favor?" I'm like, "Yeah," because I was on my bike. He's like, "Can you hail me a cab? They don't stop for me."
Oh my
And it
God.
was just like, I'm like, here he is in his like moment of well-deserved glory, and I got to hail the cab for him. So
Oh my gosh.
it is what it is.
I have a quote here that I pulled off the internet, and I found it fascinating. And it says Flannery O'Connor, as deeply Catholic and embedded in Georgia as playwright Stephen Adly Guirgis is Catholic and embedded in the Upper West Side in Harlem, wrote characters who deny grace. And they're comparing the two of you. Were you conscious of that your characters deny grace?
I think I did not, Grace. You know,
Okay, yeah.
I just
It's
they were
it
just doing a production of The Last Days of Judas Iscariot at USC.
yes.
And I knew some of the kids, so I went there a few times and I sat and watched the play. And I'm watching the play, and I'm like, I wrote the play in 2003, so it was like 20 years ago. And I'm like, how did I write this play 20 years ago? And I'm exactly in the same place, spiritually, emotionally. And I really kind of beat myself up for about 10 minutes. And I was like, all right, Stephen, just calm down and listen to the play. You mentioned Flannery O'Connor. Ethan Hawke has a movie coming out about Flannery O'Connor that I got to watch.
A doc or
No, like a narrative,
narrative film.
feature. Yeah,
Right.
that his daughter is in, and it's done in sort of a bit of an experimental style, but it's amazing. But that quote resonates because I feel like that's been certainly my characters, yes, but that's been my issue. There's been so many times where I feel that sense of grace. I feel that sense of protection, that open invitation to just live in a better manner. And then I seem to constantly, segue out. So it's an
Why
ongoing
why
struggle.
why do you think it's so hard? Because I have the same that why so hard to accept grace? It's unearned merit. It's unearned God's love. And I guess there's this whether it's Catholic or Lutheran or Baptist or whatever, that you have to suffer, you have to do this in order to win God's love. Why can't we just relax and accept it? Do you
You
think,
know,
is it cultural? Is it from our parents? What
I
do you,
mean, I remember it was a big, uh, what's it called? A light bulb went off in my head when I learned, about like children of Holocaust survivors and how much they had struggled because whatever problems they were having paled in the face of what their parents suffered.
right,
I know my mother had my grandfather was abusive alcoholic, physically, other ways, and she had a real traumatic experience. And maybe in some ways, I'm I've inherited some of that. I don't know. I mean, and right now, somebody recommended a therapist to me who's like a world class dude, like it's way above what I could ever pay, and I pay on a sliding scale, and it's been really helpful, but challenging, and it's he's yeah, I grew up Catholic, I still have that thing, and he's like, you've put yourself up on a cross, and it's like your mom was on a cross, and she died in 2006, and you were loyal to her and you stayed up on the cross with her, but now it's like 20 years later and you're still on the damn cross.
right.
So I'm trying to figure it out. But that's like what I have, like when I talk with students, sometimes I say, like, whatever it is that's inside you, it's inside me, that's broken, that's hurt, that's it it never goes away completely,
Right.
right? But
Right.
there's many different actions that we take in order to be able to function in society. But that thing, we can use it in our work. You can access that. That's why you mentioned themes that come up. Yeah, because it's all somewhere in that hurt. And there, and now it may or may not get resolved in my life. I might see you in 2 years and be like, hey man, I'm just so happy now. But at least it has a function when I can put it in the work that offers something positive as opposed to just the negative. And so
No, I
that's
think, and it's also very brave to allow yourself to be vulnerable and go, I'm a mess. This is what hurt. And I realized in my younger years, I was so busy presenting my persona to the world. Isn't Matt perfect? Isn't he? And it wasn't until I got older that I went, boy, I'm anything but perfect. Why not show the soft parts, the little gooey parts that I don't want anyone to see? And then all of a sudden, a whole new world of writing opens up because you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
and your writing is so raw and visceral and emotional. I want to ask you this though, with your parents, was one or the either the storyteller in your family? Where did you get the
Yeah,
story?
it was 100% my mother.
That's Irish. That's right there, right?
Yeah,
No, that
she wanted to be an actress, but back then it wasn't, I guess, possible or whatever. But she, my mother was very strict, but on Saturday nights, I was allowed to watch like a half an hour of TV a day, and my bedtime was 7:30. But on Saturday nights, she'd let me stay up and watch Mary Tyler Moore and Bob Newhart
right.
and Carol Burnett and all that. Like, we didn't really have money to go to the theater, but we'd watch the Oscars, we'd watch the Tony Awards. She'd take me to like the paper bag players, or like whatever was free, and every once in a while we'd see the theater. And then also, you remember the old Regency Theater on 67th and Broadway?
Oh, absolutely.
It was an old revival house. Yeah. So she would take us there and we'd see old movies. And then eventually she had to go back to work. And so I would babysit my sister on the weekends, and she would give us money and we'd go to the Regency and go see double features of old movies. So it was kind of just, it was ground into us. And then also, they told me a story when The Sting came out. I think I was 8 years old, and it was the first time I asked to go see a movie that was an adult movie. And I don't know what it was about the movie, but like I was dying to see it. And then so they took me to see it, and I loved it. And then back in the day, remember, like if The Sting would come out, then they come up with a book version.
Yes.
Yes. And I remember reading the book version like over and over again. And I was so little that that Paul Newman's character basically ran like a whorehouse, but I thought it was warehouse. So I'd say, "Mommy, this happened in the warehouse." I was just fascinated by it. And she also took us. You remember the movie Bingo Long and the Traveling All-Stars?
Absolutely.
Man, I wanted to see that movie so bad, and it was only playing on 42nd Street. And my mother, bless her heart, she took me to, double features with the, people throwing the baloney in the screen and all kind of, mayhem going on. But I loved it, and I loved that movie.
See, you inherited the wish. She had the wish, and you inherited the wish.
Yeah. And actually, my grandfather, who was like extremely problematical guy, he was deaf. Both my grandparents were deaf, and back then you couldn't, the career trajectory. He was a printer because that's what they could do, but he was a writer apparently, and he wrote for the Catholic, whatever, and he won an award from the Pope, and for years, my mother was like, you get it from my father, and I resented it so much that this guy that brought a lot of horror as well as love into my mother's life, that I had this thing. And it was just this year working with somebody, and I finally he had me write a letter to my grandfather. He's been dead for years,
right?
And I realized I could start to let it go. But yeah, my father was amazing. By the way, my mother was a storyteller, but she was not funny at all. Like my sense of humor, yes. Whatever I have, it comes totally. My dad would say like 3 words, but when he finally said it, it was funny as hell. Yeah. So, but overall, I was blessed to have them.
Well, you got it from somebody. I'm going to switch gears because you've written for stage, you've written for television, and I want to talk about the difference between those two for you. Yeah. I'm thinking very specifically about your collaboration with Baz Luhrmann on The Get Down. So, what gears did you have to shift to go from the total freedom of writing for the play to now writing for the small screen with a big time director? What?
Sure. If I can go back just a little bit,
yes.
The first job that I ever got was working for David Milch.
Okay.
On a show called Big Apple. It was like 8 episodes, but that was, you start to get successful, then they want you to do stuff that make money. And they're like, TV. And I said, I only will work in TV. I was an idiot. I was like, I'll only work in TV if it's David Milch or Tom Fontana. So I had a meeting with Fontana. He didn't have a job. And then David hired me. I started to get a glimpse of how much I didn't know from working with David. And then I worked on a show with this guy, Shane Salerno. It was 13 episodes. It was called UC Undercover. NBC Sunday night at 10, Ving Rhames and John Seda and others. And it wasn't the same quality as like a David Milch or Fontana might do, but that's where I really learned. And that's where I learned that's like, it's, it's story.
Yes.
That's it.
Yep.
That's it. And back in network TV, you got 44 minutes to tell a story. You got a teaser, you better hook them up, and then you're building the commercial. And so I really learned I started to learn about economy, and the importance of story. And it really came to a head. We did a play. I wrote this play called Little Flower of East Orange. And it had Ellen Burstyn and Michael Shannon, David Zayas and his wife. It was a great cast. Right. And you're a very talented writer. It's like, if you're talented, what you write, it's going to be pretty good, And so people are watching, but we couldn't get the play right. It wasn't quite working. And me and Phil, we'd sit there and be like, what the hell's going on? Opening night, everyone's celebrating, and we're like, and it wasn't until like after open, I realized it's like, oh, I wrote a play that was essentially about a mother and a son. And the son and the mother don't meet until basically almost the whole of the first act is over. So those first 50 minutes, are they entertaining? Yeah. Is he a good writer? Yeah. Do you like the characters? Yeah. Do you like Michael Shannon? Do you like it? Yeah. So it's like the audience doesn't know. It's like, when I go see stuff sometimes, or I'm watching stuff on television, and it's good. And I don't know why all of a sudden, like, my butt starts to itch, or it gets, and it's because the fucking part of my language, because the story stopped.
The story stopped. Yes.
It's the story stopped. And it's like, and we something that somebody smarter than me said to me once is like, we're all born, by the time we're 8 years old, we've heard so many stories and we've watched so many cartoons. We're all geniuses at story.
Yes.
And so the great lesson of television was about, like, if you're not telling the story, it doesn't matter how funny you are, how gritty you are, or how real you are. Eventually, oh, I'm tired. Oh, I got to go to the bathroom. So, and then Baz, it was a labor of love, but it was labor. And I love Baz. I would probably donate an organ if it need be to help him. But for anybody who is who's a writer, it's like, when they say you're going to create a show with somebody, the problem that I had was, like, Baz was much more famous than me, much more successful than me. So in some senses, I was creating a show for Baz, but in many senses, I was not creating a show with Baz. It was like, Baz saw a motherfucker with the hat and was like, this guy's amazing. This is the only person I want. So they're like, well, let's get him. And it was hard, man.
Yeah.
It was hard. It was, it took it took years of my life that I'll never get back. I was 100 pounds lighter when I started working with him. And the last day of work, it went down to like doing ADR, writing ADR, because he's rewriting scenes that have already been shot and printed. The last thing I did was to try to rewrite a scene with ADR to make it say something different. And then it was done. And then it was Trump's inauguration. So I went through 4 years with Baz, and it was like, okay, now here comes Trump, and so it was tough. And I say it like, I love the guy, and he's a genius. You want to talk about someone who knows story? I mean, he was someone that was like stuck in Australia, and he had some type of an illness where he couldn't hang out with his friends. So he just like read every Greek myth, every Shakespeare when he was like 10. He's a genius. But there's a guy, a writer you might know named Seth Rosenfeld, who worked on a show, a guy I respect a lot, and a tough guy, not a wuss. One day I called him up in the midst of the process, and I was just like, man, I don't know, I can't take it anymore, blah, 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 blah. And he was like, Steve, Steve, I've been working in television for, whatever it was, 20 years. I grew up in the Bronx. I was terror. He's like, I've never cried so much as an adult on this show. But it was great. And I love the show. I love the kids.
Yes.
I love Baz, and I loved the world, but it was hell, man. I mean, it's like I always say, do you have children?
Yes, two, 35 and 33, a daughter and a son.
The lesson that I took from that was like, if I have children, I'll write for the Rugrats. I don't care what it is. Put money on the table. But if I don't, I'm not going to do, I will never again do something because it seems like it's like,
Right.
no, it's like life is too short. And, life is, I mean, yeah, now I'm 58. You might be a couple years older than me, but you start to see that life is short,
Yes.
So what I put my time into, it's gotta mean something.
That's ultimately it, isn't it? It's about time. It doesn't. It really doesn't boil down to money. It's about time, because every minute I'm spending on your project or this project is a minute I'm not spending on my passion project. And I went through that, and I have a confession that I touch on in the book, is that anything that came out of passion and a personal spot in my soul succeeded. And then you're out here in the hamster wheel of Hollywood, and you get running and going, and you stop turning out pieces of work that are a part of you, and you start creating product. And that's when it's crap. And that's when I said I knew I had to close up shop and get out, because I was grinding out product instead of truly creating from a place of passion. And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think that there's the good version of everything. And when I get depressed, like, I don't say, oh, let me watch The Wire or Masterpiece Theater. Like, I watch Law and Order, SVU, all those shows. And whenever I run into any of those actors, when actors have been on series TV for a long time, they get a little bit of this thing of like, oh, I'm just taking the money. I'm like, no, no. I always tell them, it's like the Salinger book, Franny and Zooey.
Yes.
Do It for the Fat Lady. Yep. I was like, you have no idea. Actors on network shows and sports announcers, it's like, you have no idea how important you are to people. I mean, it sounds silly to say, but it's like, but it's true. Like, what you do is important. What you do sustains me, like I'm a Met fan. They suck every year, but their announcers are like family. I'm going to listen because I want to hear what Gary, Keith, and Ron say, and I feel at home when I watch, like, so many shows that I've seen, every episode of, and it's not all quality. It's about, I don't know.
It's a relationship. You feel like
it's a relationship.
Yeah, it's a relationship. Well, I'm going to talk about your acting, because recently you were on Winning Time. But when I was researching for this podcast, I knew you acted. I knew you acted in film. And I didn't know how many credits you had. You act a lot.
Yeah, not as much as I'd like, but as much as I can.
Yeah. And I really wanted to do this podcast to ask you this question. When you're an actor and you're on the set and you're there to act, can you turn off the writer part of your brain and stop rewriting scenes and worrying about lighting? Can you just totally be an actor when you're doing that?
Yeah. I mean, because I don't, I haven't done that much. So when I'm on a set, my first thought is like, don't get fired. Seriously. I'm not being.
No, I understand the feeling. I get you.
And like on Winning Time, I was like, thank God, like John Riley is just a mensch, and he really looked out for me. He really took care of me. But like from day one, I was like, my job is to support John. That's what my character's function is. And so whatever I'm doing has to be through the filter of making his journey either harder or easier, and that really gave me a framework. But no, when I became a writer, that's when I really actually learned to respect much more the written word, because I know what it takes to put it out. So yeah. Now with Winning Time, the forgetting the name of one of the titans of our industry, the creator,
You don't have
the
to. It's
hell,
HBO, and
it's the hell is his name? And when we shot the pilot, he directed the pilot, and he encourages improvisation.
right.
And that was a tremendous freedom, but also like that show was written really well. And most of the stuff that I've done has been written well, or my part is small enough that I know what my function is. Like I know what I'm there to do, and it's enough to do that as well as I can because it's in support of the thing, you know. And you learn as you go. I got cast in man, my name's so bad. A show that was on Netflix, and I had a scene where I was a patient with a psychiatrist, and she was like this legendary actress who had like worked with Tennessee Williams, and I had to cry in the scene. So I was like, I'm going to give her everything I can, you know? So the camera, you know, of course, starts on her. We do like 6 takes. I'm weeping, wailing, like, you know, I'm giving her everything. And then by the time it's time to turn around, they're like, okay, we're good. It was like an empty. I had no feelings, no thoughts. I felt like, wow, maybe I'm a serial killer. But I got bailed out because of the training. I learned to just get quiet, and I got quiet, and it sounds so stupid, but there was an actor named Kevin Gear, who I know your wife
Oh, I
knew
know
really,
Kevin. Yes, God, yes, great
and I
actor.
swear that guy's bit was like a saint in my creative life. And I heard Kevin Gear's voice in that chaotic set, you know, end of the day, everyone wants to go home, and he was like, "We didn't bring you this far for you to go down now. You know, don't worry, rest, breathe." And I just come, and then, you know, I did whatever sufficient to do the scene. So you learn as you go, and it's such a gift anytime you get to work. Like my friends, like David, like Liza, like John, like you all. I'm never envious of what actors get to do. I'm never jealous. When I see my friends stuff, I'm happy for them. But you know, even when I have the get down, even I won a Pulitzer Prize, like if I see you in one scene in Law and Order, I'm like, that's what I want to do.
Yes, I understand
You
that.
know,
Yes.
and then when I actually got on a TV show and saw what it's like when you're actually cast, and this again, all of a sudden, like, everyone's nice to you, and I called them back up. I was like, honestly, I've always been happy for you. Now I'm just thrilled for you because this is you know, this is pretty great. You know.
Well, the amazing career. I want to talk a little bit. You were a Catholic earlier. I don't want to get into religious dogma, but I know from many of your friends talk about how spiritual you are. Do you have a spiritual practice? Is it just a matter of tapping into the mystery, or do you do you meditate? What do you do to prepare to create all that you've created?
Yeah, I want to know who the hell thinks I'm so spiritual.
I got a list of them. They
I
go,
don't know.
Stephen's
I
the
don't
most
know.
spiritual guy I know. And I go, man, look at some of these plays, and you go, this is street poetry, and but you're tapping into something.
For sure, tapping into something, because I think that all writing and really all creating it's a collaboration. It's
Yeah.
you and something else. It doesn't come out of you. I think that for me, for years, and part of the reason I was angry at God, I don't even know if there's God, or if what I think of God as God, but I remember that it's like I was given a talent, clearly given talent to write, right? But I could only write if I pray. At the end of the day, the last thing I do is like, please help me. If you want me to do this, please guide me, work through me, you know, like, and it was a source of real resentment, because it's like, it's as if I said to you, like, hey man, here's an Alfa Romeo, but you can only drive it if I'm sitting next to you. You know, you know, I'm gonna be like, fuck you, fuck you, you know. And really what it is it's like I got one of the best deals imaginable, because I mean, you know, I was a bike messenger, I was a busboy, I was a waiter, I was a messenger. I've done so many jobs. Like, I actually get to do something that we get to do something that we love for a living, and actually make a living. And health insurance for decades, my health insurance was like, don't get hurt, you know. And it's a blessing, and it's sort of the very much human to take the thing that's actually the blessing and make it a source of resentment.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, as a kid, I was taught, you know, about God and stuff, and I was on board. And then once they told us the story of Judas and how, you know, we're not saying he went to hell, but he went to hell, I lost all my faith. And then when I got older, it just became a thing of like, I need help. I can't function without something. So it's been an ongoing search and trial and error, and more misses than hits. And it's certainly found its way into the work. And you know, I don't know. It's ongoing, man. I mean, I would like,
Absolutely, it's ongoing. Not only the beautiful thing about being a writer is you never stop learning, and you, like you said, it never gets easier. You fool yourself. Oh, I've written 3 series. The next one's going to be easier. It's never easy, but I think you can keep growing and learning as a writer, and spiritually the same thing. I do the same thing. I pray either before I go to bed at night or before I start writing, and a lot of times it's just, I call it opening up or allowing yourself to be receptive and shedding all your selfish, ego based impulses and go, if I'm nothing, then maybe something can happen.
that's
And
right.
then that's when you're surprised, you know, when those moments ding you and you go, oh, I didn't know she was going to do that. I didn't know he was going to walk through the door. And
That's right.
that's what keeps you writing, I think. Right?
Yep. And that's what, you know, I'm a big music fan. Like, I've heard Tom Waits, I've heard Neil Young, I've heard Bob Dylan, like, all say the same things, not to compare me or you to them,
Right.
but that like that like that there is a muse,
Yeah.
and you better be available to it. And
Being
that means a
available, that's
level
the
of,
operative word, being
yeah,
available, right?
yeah, and there's a
Yeah.
certain amount of spiritual fitness that dictates that,
Yeah.
and a suppression of the ego,
Yes.
you know. But the spiritual part, it's more, you know, I'm very flawed, but I think my parents taught me about kindness and generosity. You know, the Egyptian side, it's all about generosity. Like, and my mother was very kind, and so that is what I try to stay in that room. And one of the great things, and I say this to young writers, and the thing that can take me out of myself and my ego, is one of the best things that we have to offer as writers, besides the work, is that we get to create community.
Yes.
That people, you know, we get to give them jobs and health insurance, all that's good, but a reason to come together, a reason to interact, a reason to love, a reason, all that. And that I'm realizing over time is it's a responsibility, but it's also a gift that's I'm happy to be able to have that. I remember seeing one of my plays at Steppenwolf. This was years ago. I think things are a little different now. And afterwards, everyone at the cast party kept thanking me. They're like, "Thank you so much. We're so glad we get to be here." And after a while, I'm like, "Yeah. No, it's all right. It's okay." Blah blah. And then they were like, "No, you don't understand." This was around 2005 or something. They're like, in Chicago, you know, there's a white theater, and then there's a black theater, and then there's a Latino theater, but there's never any things that make us all be together, you
Mm,
know. And I never forgot that, because that's literally creating community
right.
where it wasn't there before. And that's an honor, you
Yeah,
know.
I understand that. I end each podcast with this question because it's called Glimpses and seeing little glimpses of God. You mentioned kindness and generosity with your parents. Do you see glimpses in your daily life where you see a moment of kindness or generosity or uh, grace, since we've been talking about that?
Yeah, man, absolutely. This might be a good way to close because I was having my latest spiritual crisis like a year ago. And there's two priests who I really think are doing the job as they should be done. One is this guy, Father Jim Martin. And I called him and I was like, man, I got to get some God or I'm screwed, And he said to me, if you want to have a relationship with God, start by noticing.
There-
And I was like, noticing, okay. And then like a day or two later, I was outside working my computer and I got so frustrated and I was, whatever happened in my thing. And I like took a pause and looked up and I saw the sky and the sun. And when people say to me, like, how could there not be a God? You see the sun and sky? I'm like, shut the fuck up. But in the noticing, it changed my atoms. It changed me. And then a week later, I went and saw, Father Greg Boyle, who runs Homeboy Industries.
I know about him. I've never met him, but I know about him.
Yeah.
Yes.
And when I spoke to Father Jim, I said I was going to have lunch with this guy. And Father Jim, who's a humble servant of God, but he also has an ego. And he was like, oh, I think he's going to be a saint someday. Anyway, I went to go see Father Greg. And I was like, yeah, I'm just spiritually, I got nothing. What do you got for me? And he started, now this is a Jesuit priest. He said, Stephen, I got to be honest with you. Like, I don't think God intervenes in human affairs. He's like, I got parishioners all the time. Pray for my tia, pray for my this. And I say, yeah, but I don't think, he said, but if you want to know what I do believe, he's like, if you want to know who is walking around with Jesus in them, or he said, and call Jesus whatever you want, is that they carry themselves with bravery and joy.
Mm.
And it blew me away. For like 2 days, I was like, what the hell? Because I understood the bravery, right?
Right.
And sometimes we come up short and sometimes we come up big. But that idea that if I'm not experiencing and allowing joy into my life, then I'm not really having the full experience that is intended for me. And also, I can't really pass it on. I can be a cheerleader, I could say blah, 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 but if it's not really in me, I can't pass it on. And it was very instructional. I can't say I'm a most joyfulest man, but I try, and I notice it now. And I notice, and I notice the good.
Well,
much more.
that is a perfect way to wrap this up. And Stephen, I know you're always busy. I so appreciate you taking the time to do this. And
No.
I mean, this has been inspiring for me. I want to go spread a little joy, but more importantly, I want to get back to the writing table. I want to write some more.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I hope I get to see you in person. Maybe we have coffee with DJ sometime. But
We will do that.
I
All
love
right.
it,
Well,
man. Thank you.
that is it for this episode of Glimpses. And thank you all for listening. And remember, as you go about your day, take the time to look around and catch a glimpse. My friends, thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Glimpses. Speaking of, we're merely weeks away from the release of my latest book. And the best part? All of the proceeds will be going to charities who support children in need. You can get your copy in the link below. Until next time, have an amazing day.